Good morning, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing the screen, but before I do, I want to welcome everybody to our latest webcast, CPTED and the Revival of Urban Blight. All right. So as mentioned a couple times, if you would please indicate in the chat who you are, maybe where you're from, so we can keep up with our participants from all over the world. I know we have quite a few folks registered, and I think we're at 60 participants right now. We will be turning off the chat soon and moving everything to the Q&A, but welcome everybody and howdy from the great state of Texas. My name is Patrick McCulley. I'm a captain with the Garland, Texas Police Department, and I've been a CPTED practitioner for over 2 decades, and I've been an ICA member for most of that time. This is our second webcast for the Provisional United States Chapter of the ICA, and we're excited to have so many participants joining us from the United States and all over the world. For the next 90 minutes, I'll be moderating an amazing panel of guests on the topic of CPTED and the revival of urban blight, from the 1970s big box stores to 2020's virtualization of our life. So before we begin, I have a disclaimer. Oops, the views expressed in this presentation are those of guest speakers and do not necessarily reflect the position of the ICA. The ICA assumes no legal responsibility for the speaker's statements. The ICA does not assume ownership of the intellectual property, accuracy, or validity of the presented information. Let's see if I can kill that. Now, a couple of things before we do our introduction. Here's our format for the day. We have 90 minutes. I'll do my best to keep us on track using the chat and the Q&A section. We'll have presentations from each panelist. We'll also be discussing topics and questions from the online participants. If you'd like, please check in on the chat with your name and location so we'll know who's joining us. We'll be closing that soon. To add to the discussion, please use the Q&A bar at the bottom of your screen. It'll allow you to enter a question instead of using the general chat. If your question is for a specific person or in response to a specific topic, please include them. It may also be helpful to include the details on who is asking the question. We'll also be sharing emails in the chat so we can stay engaged after the webcast and continue exploring this intriguing and timely topic. Now I'm going to turn it over to Greg Seville for an opening statement.
Okay, thank you, Patrick, and welcome to everybody to this chat, our second official and third informal webinar webcast. This is a webcast, so it's more of a discussion, not so much a training thing. So we're a new chapter of the ICA, CPTED USA, and we represent practitioners in CPTED from across the country. In our early deliberations about our topics and the kinds of things we're concerned about, the one topic that seemed to keep coming up over and over is the state of our cities, particularly the state of our downtowns, and what we're describing as the revival of urban blight. So in recent years, we have seen the revival of urban blight and urban disorder in many of our central cities to a level that I think we haven't seen since the 1960s and 70s. It was and the 60s, of course, was a time of Jane Jacobs when she wrote her work in response to that, which led to the development and the evolution of crime prevention through environmental design, our field called CPTED. Today, of course, we see many incidents of urban unrest, protests, riots, homelessness, about poverty, about racial unrest, and so forth, and homelessness, particularly toxic street drugs, fentanyl in our central cities. And as an urban planner who's concerned and loves cities, as Jane Jacobs was an urbanist who loved cities, this is alarming. And so I think the position that planning takes is if we lose our downtowns, we lose our cities. So today's webinar is about that general topic, about urban blight and the revival and the kinds of things that CPTED may or may not do to fix that. So Patrick, over to you.
Sure. So as we go through, we've got quite a variety of topics and things to explore. So we're going to kind of open up easy with each panelist. As we get to you, if you didn't give a small introduction of who you are, but I really want to deep dive now and get into the topic. So Randy, I'm going to go with you. Why is this topic important to you, and kind of springing off what Greg said, why is urban blight something we should be concerned about? Oh, Randy, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, I self-muted. I think there's been such a strong effort over the last 25 years to strengthen Main Street USA. In fact, it's been a common phrase, Main Street USA, about bringing mom and pop stores, about having a sense of ownership, having a sense of community, having an end destination for people to go that they don't have to get into their car to go to. All those basic principles were not only part of the basis of CPTED and defensible space and good urban planning. And now what we've seen is that because of the political upheaval in the United States over the last 12, 15 years, downtowns have been are taking the brunt force of any kind of social and political upheavals. And there's been burnings and riots and store lootings and the flash mob mobs and people are afraid to go to downtown. And parking rules of engagement have changed where it's expensive to go downtown because we don't have mass transportation in a lot of the cities. So it becomes very expensive to park your car in New York City for an evening to go see a show and go out for dinner. That's a whole nother dinner cost right there, is just to pay for parking. So I think that the challenge has been, where did things go wrong? Where did it take a left turn that downtown's revival and revivalist efforts to bring young people downtown, to bring jobs downtown, and then we had the plague pretty much make everyone go away from downtown and work at home. So part of what's going on here is this conflict between convenience and practicality, security and safety issues. And that's sort of the basis of this discussion today about, do we want to go back downtown? Are people just going to stay hidden in their apartments or homes in suburbia and watch Netflix and just work on their computers and not have any interaction with human life forms again, which is sort of what's happened over the last 2.5, 3 years? I know in downtown Fort Lauderdale, the office buildings pretty much got emptied out. And my wife and I sort of discussed about how it's such an important socialization effort when you work downtown to go out for happy hour. That's where you meet people. That's where you interact with people. That's where you discuss, gee, what are you doing? Oh, there's a new job opening up. Oh, I heard there's a new law firm. It's all about, when I grew up in the 80s and 90s, it was all about networking. But networking has moved away from cocktail parties and face-to-face to now Facebook. It's the proverbial networking. So there's a lot of underlying issues here that are going to come up in today's discussion about what is happening and the fact that people are more comfortable shopping in a Walmart and a big box store out, somewhere quiet in suburbia where they don't think there's going to be a shooting or have to pay for parking and or get hassled by panhandling or homeless people. So there's a real opportunity here to make our cities great again. However, there's a lot of distractions and tugs and pulls to make that happen.
Thank you, Randy. And that's a great segue, talking about communities and how we sort of may be engaging or disengaging. So I'm going to turn over to Pamela to introduce herself and talk about that, please.
Hi, yes, I'm Pamela Daniels. I'm a community engagement strategist with the Brick Karate Group, and I've been a community organizer and a planner from the neighborhood level and the citywide level for a number of years. I've also been in the nonprofit world in trying to support the grassroots efforts to really raise voices and to move the needle on quality of life issues, largely, which is what we're dealing with when we're talking about blight, how these environmental conditions actually impact real people. And I think at the center of that, and certainly at the center of the more modern approaches to CPTED, is to really listen to the community and have community-led both processes and formulating the agenda in terms of what should be happening, what could be happening, and then allowing community members to actually be at the table when it comes to the decision-making and implementation. And I think cities that are doing that successfully are seeing more sustainable outcomes. And I think that those who have are maybe experiencing some of the more not so sustainable results have more to do with the combining or the really the converging of both outside impacts like migrant communities and things like that are very real and happening in real places, but also the lack of really understanding the kinds of growth and development and the needs that are on the ground for a community to be cohesive in addition to safe. So
Thank you so much. Speaking of that, I want to give an opportunity for Renee to introduce himself and tell us a little bit about where he's at and how his city is seeing this firsthand.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, well, welcome everybody. My name is Renee Barrett. I'm an architect working in Portland, Oregon, and living here. I came from Germany. I made this my hometown here, and I was really excited always because for me, Portland was a very European city at a very small scale. I think we have the smallest city blocks, in the nation, and the downtown area, which means a lot of corners, good for retail, and we were really a city filled of little small startup companies, people making stuff, selling them from the little storefront windows. We were not like a city ever that was dominated by a large like Google or Microsoft like Seattle. We have an office in Seattle too. It's a different vibe. It's really like a grassroots effort, like people being creative and making things. And then I saw, unfortunately, first with the pandemic, again, because all these efforts, I mean, you could see the first generation CPTED principle that work, small little stores, people hanging out on sidewalks, sitting in cafes. It was a beautiful, lively town, and I never was afraid at night to walk downtown one end to the other. So anyway, all the CPTED principles, eyes on the street, it was a lively, beautiful place. Were all working well. And then the pandemic hit, and then we started working from home. We had a lot of social unrest in Portland. We have 174 consecutive nights, actually, of like what Greg referred to before, also as all events that really drove people away. And honestly, I have not been in downtown for a community event for a long time myself because it's not pleasant anymore. The urban blight, it's really depressing. It's not even I'm afraid, but it's just not a fun place to be, And again, I think CPTED can really go a long way when you're applying the principles that were working so well before, but bringing people back into downtown and to fill the streets again with nice, positive activities and festivals, which we try sometimes. We have festivals again, so it's starting up. But I think CPTED is a great tool actually to get us back on track, kind of thing.
Thank you so much, Renee. Greg?
Yeah, well, again, my whole approach, we shifted our CPTED practice over to community building, neighborhood building, into a strategy called Safe Growth some years ago. And for us, it's a big deal because neighborhood building, community building is the root of good crime prevention. It's certainly sustainable crime prevention. And what worries me about what's going on in central cities, particularly in this country, but elsewhere as well, is the responses that you see cities trying to use to deal with it. Well, there's one approach called the ostrich effect, which is basically you put your head in the sand and you try to ignore that anything's going on, and you have squabbles among city council, and the police, run call to call, and nothing gets done. That's one strategy. The other, of course, is the stormtrooper strategy. The stormtrooper tech is where you go in and you clean it up and you sweep and you do that, hopefully with no thought to where do these people go? Where do the homeless people go, for one thing, but also where does the drugs go? Where it's going to go somewhere. Moving it around your city is nothing more than a fancy version of whack-a-mole, what we used to do in the carnival. So that's a silly strategy. And then there's the strategy that we believe in Safe Growth, which is community building. You rebuild our cities in the way we should. So what we do is we say, what can CPTED do? What can it not do? Some forms of CPTED exclude people. It fences off, uses access control. That's what we don't want to do because that's what leads to some of these dysfunctions. Other forms of CPTED bring people together. So what I'm concerned about is how do we bring them together? I look at many of these same blight issues in other countries. I've been to Sweden. I've seen the same thing happening there. I'm from Canada originally. I go back to Canada a lot, and I've seen the same things happening in Canada, particularly in the smaller cities there as well. So I want to know where we see successful cities that are still resistant to this blight. What are they doing right, and what are they doing wrong? So that's what I'll start with, and I'll leave it there.
Thank you, sir. So, Julia, what about you? What are things like where you're at, and what does urban blight look like for you there?
Hello, everyone. And well, hello from San Francisco. Home is San Diego. I've been on the road for 2 weeks and I can't even recount how many different cities I've been in, but spend a lot of time in San Diego and San Francisco where my family is. And definitely San Francisco, big changes. My background, crime analyst, started in San Diego Police Department. So great to see so many crime analysts in the webinar. And I started in the problem-oriented policing days. And so CPTED was definitely one of the strategies we worked on for a lot, or was used for a lot of different problems, and is continued to be used. I actually started teaching a class at UC San Diego. CPTED, or Environmental Design and Crime Prevention, is the official title, in the Department of Urban Studies and Planning, and joined ICA when I started teaching for the excellent resources that it offers and the excellent networking, such as the folks, my fellow panelists. So definitely big differences. I think one of the things we need to think about is, what does urban blight look like from city to city? There are definitely a lot of similarities. Been in Portland a lot, Seattle, Denver, etc. And we see a lot of similarities. We see empty buildings. We see an increase in homelessness. I think the important thing to think about is, even though there are a lot of similarities, that we need to understand the differences from community to community, and the why, the understanding that, San Francisco being such a hub and people fleeing the downtowns, and what will it take? And it's, not just getting rid of homeless people, because we know that that doesn't work. So as a crime analyst, always support, collecting data, and not just data about crimes, but really data from the communities, data about what we're seeing and why one neighborhood or one street even is very different than a street next door or the neighborhood next door.
Thank you so much. So Dr. Martin, you're up next. Tell us about the criminologist perspective and kind of what you're seeing where you are.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Allison Martin. I am on the faculty at San Jose State University in the Justice Studies Department. I obviously work with students and researchers. I have a background in criminology from the University of South Carolina. And working with students and seeing this upcoming generation, we see a lot of them want to discuss what is happening in our current world. So with the virtualization, with a lot of the brick and mortar academic institutions shuttering, as we can see in the news, a lot of the private institutions are shuttering right now, which will probably happen to the public institutions here in the next few years, with the virtualization just growing and growing. Urban blight is becoming a huge problem, and has been for the past, I would say, even 10 years, but it's just growing immensely. We talk about this all the time. I think this generation is probably becoming more interested in green spaces, and CPTED really has a place in green spaces and creating safety and re-owning spaces in that regard. And I think that's really important. From a criminological perspective and theory, opportunity for crime and territoriality is essential. So I think we should discuss those 2 points here. So that's what I want to talk about today.
Thank you so much. So we've turned the chat back on. We've had this couple of folks jumping back in. So if you're in the chat, please drop your name in there, maybe where you're from, so we can keep up with the full scope of who's attending today. We have 74 participants, so we're doing a really good job. Mia, I'm going to bring you up next. Tell us how things are where you're at and how urban blight may be affecting that area.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Mia, and I am brand new to the idea of safe growth and the CPTED concepts. And I just started basically this spring. I got interested because I saw the decline, I think primarily over the pandemic when I had too much time on my hands and I wanted to be involved. And I thought big politics was the way to go. And I started realizing that it was very ineffective. How could I really become involved? And I realized that has to be on a local level. And one thing I've asked people repeatedly is, what makes them want to, change their community or neighborhood? And that's feeling connected to a larger purpose. And I realize how really, truly important that is, because part-time I live in West Hollywood and there's quite a few homeless and just, I see urban blight occurring. I live in one of the most desirable in Norma Triangle, most desirable areas. And just down the block, there's been coffee shops that have been vacant for years now. And, I noticed like the decline. And then I started living part-time in Palm Springs, and I started noticing a decline, even though we have a pretty high volume of tourists. And so I realized this is affecting everyone. And it's interesting because one thing I realized also in my research is that different cities, like Hurricane Katrina took out 80% of New Orleans. It was the auto industry in Detroit, and sort of with West Hollywood and Palm Springs, it makes it a little bit more difficult because these are, very wealthy communities, and it's a little bit more difficult to determine the causes of urban blight. And is it just that we don't care, or we certainly, share in the tax load, and just seeing the deterioration of the city and what we might do about it. For example, in West Hollywood and Palm Springs, I noticed out of a score of 100 for crime score, we scored in the low 40s for both cities, which is really disappointing because I feel like all of these things go hand in hand. And I think just getting people, connected. I started reading a book called Topophilia when I got really involved in safe growth. And I got very frustrated because I'm from corporate America, and I thought, why aren't things being done? And there's city regulations. And I talked to Greg, and I realized like it really is about just creating a sense of connection to a place and to the people that we meet every day in downtown. And one could say that that's kind of the cause of a lot of urban blight, is just that lack of connection and texting. And I think, it takes out a lot of the emotions when we disconnect with people and we don't have to deal with it. And we have to bring that back somehow and, make people feel like they take ownership of their neighborhood. And I realized just the effects of having a dirty house, that it can affect our attitude strongly and the way we feel versus when we walk into something that's orderly and well kept and well cared for. I also began looking at statistics about just what would happen if we just cleaned up like one lot, for example, and put some trees on there. And there's been like major studies, 6 major studies that qualified to actually represent this as a statistic. There was a 5% overall reduction in gun violence just from in that surrounding neighborhood. And so I started seeing those remarkable changes that some people were successful at. And, particularly in European countries, I've traveled quite extensively, Amsterdam, like, south of France. And the one thing in common is that they tend to, I think, care more about their environments. And there's like lots of cafes where people are still connecting. And, 3 and 4 in the morning, you'll see people out and talking and, sharing a dinner with complete strangers. And I hope that answers the question. It was a little bit roundabout way, and I'm new to this. I'm really just learning. It's kind of hard to take all of it in at once.
Outstanding. Thank you so much. I do want to give a little bit of mine. So I think it says up there I'm a police captain, but I'm currently working homicides and major crimes and persons crimes for the city of Garland. But my previous history was 15 years doing community policing, doing exactly what Greg talks about, which is building community relationships, building up those sort of structures, but at the same time, seeing a lot of these bigger factors moving around us, and trying to figure out how do the police have a role in making ourselves safer within the larger pantheon of the community, all the different resources and programs we have. So I do want to ask Greg to give us a little bit of a placeholder. Give us a little overview of first, second, and third generation CPTED. Since we talked about it a bit, kind of let everybody else in on what we're talking about.
Well, the first generations came out of the Jane Jacobs era, and Oscar Newman and C.Ray Jeffrey and Shlomo Angel, Ben Berkeley, that whole group from the 60s and early 70s. And it was the, reducing crime opportunities by modifying the physical environment, hedging and landscaping and lighting and things like that, technical sort of opportunity side of it. And then in the 80s, it started to grow. And we began to see more focus on place, and then we just realized that social was a big deal. Eyes on the street aren't just a factor; it's also whose eyes are they, and do they care about the street? So that led to the evolution of second generation CPTED in the 90s, and the ICA was where a lot of that grew up. And the second generation is about building sense of neighborhood, sense of place, the kinds of things that Newman talked about in the 70s, but got lost in the 80s. And some CPTED instructors still say if you teach basic CPTED, you get all the social stuff in it. That's nonsense. That doesn't happen at all, as we've seen by many CPTED strategies that isolate and is causing problems that way. So second gen is about the evolution of social programming and getting folks to work together, building a sense of ownership and care about each other and that kind of thing, how neighborhoods talk to each other. And then third generation is at least the last sort of version of that story, and it's about 5 years old now, and it emerges out of this overwhelming tsunami of research studies in social psychology and clinical neurology and environmental studies that's showing us these massive changes in behavior as a result of things like environmental changes to the environment, physical environment, gardening, things like that. So those are the three. Hope that helps.
It does. And so I want to bring all this home. I'm going to call on Randy next, but I want Randy to talk about, really, is this the natural cycle of cities to go in and out of blight cycles? We've talked about the 1970s to the 2020s. Did post-COVID create a perfect storm of conditions? Sort of, how do we get where we are, and what can we look forward to next?
Sorry. There we go. Unmute myself. When America was forming as a country in the 1800s and the turn of the 19th century, all we had was the urban cores, and the urban cores became really nasty and dirty from construction, from industry, from pollution. There was a lot of blight in the sense of people didn't have good housing. There was a great disparity in wealth between the workers and the different immigration pools that were coming into the United States in the 19th century. And in the 1920s, when you look at the Chicago School of Sociology, America was not a very fun place to be, especially in the big cities like Chicago and Philly and Boston and Baltimore and New York, et cetera, et cetera. So there was this concerted effort in the 70s that we needed to get people out of the suburbia after World War II and get them back into the downtowns. I mean, people left in World War II to get their half acre of land and build their house and to get their 2-car garage. And that was the American dream after World War II and the Korean War. And that's when we built the road network to support all that. So the entire country was built on the rail system and the automobile, and getting from, and this of course was because General Eisenhower saw what would happen in Germany in World War II and the Autobahn, and how effective that was about moving goods and services throughout Europe and through that country. Fast forward into the 80s and 90s, now, there was a concerted effort of moving. It became very chic to move back downtown. It became a cool place to be. And so there was this ebb and flow of changing from the 1920s blight into now, we're going to put the mom and pop stores again. And the fact that having the concept of live, work, and play in downtown, that was what it was all about, live, work, and play. And so we've seen and the Main Street concept. So many cities were starting to nurture a Main Street and shopping and support parking, and it was safe, and it was patrols and movies and theater and nightclubs and restaurants, and there was things to do and places to go and people to meet. Things were going relatively good in the early 2000s, I thought. I know that I've seen a huge growth in the downtown cores of the cities of South Florida and the cities that I've traveled to around the world are those cities that are exciting and safe. When you look at the big cities like Paris and Berlin and Portugal, the cities in Spain and Portugal and Italy and Greece. But then all of a sudden it became very expensive. And so people couldn't really afford to live downtown. And there started being a restructuring about how do young people support and live. So the buildings that are being built now, at least in my area, are apartment buildings that are rentals that are very expensive, very small bedrooms, but lots of social spaces, because the young people want to have their pool room and they want to have their workspace so they can get on the computer, and they want to have a little place to get their green tea and all those kind of things going on. And they don't need a lot of room for a big bedroom that we did back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So the whole structuring of architecture is changing as a response of what do people really want to live in, and what is that experience to be? And I know in our city here, it's a dog city and a cat city. People have their pets, and that's a really important part of walking your dog and having animals. And that all went great until the last 10 or 15 years, where the consensus building became so challenging, where you couldn't get agreement. You couldn't get key resource people to agree on anything. You couldn't get community consensus. You couldn't get political consensus. You couldn't get financial consensus. And as a result, it became very difficult to make decisions. And that's sort of where it takes us up to today, where there is an ebb and flow, like waves coming in from the ocean, where the cities thrive and then the cities, wither away. And right now, because of the fact that people don't need to go to an office to work, and they don't need to get into a car to go somewhere, they can pretty much do everything they need to, either in their apartment or downstairs walking their dog, or going to a local gym or something of that nature. Even supermarkets, we don't need to go to malls anymore. Everything is being delivered to us. This is a huge shift of consciousness about where we meet people and where you do placemaking and where you develop a sense of community. And those basic ingredients aren't there anymore.
Thank you very much, Randy. I like that one. So I do have one question coming from the comments, and I'm going to address this one to Pamela. The question is, how can you address violent homeless persons when the police have very little power to enforce the laws on the books?
So I think this is where, it's a great question. Thank you for that. I think it was Ms. Gale. I think this is where coalition building really comes into play, where if, for example, in the city of Newark, where I am, there is a commission, a homeless a collaboration or task force that has been put together that's really targeted the daily triage of support that's needed, in addition to really identifying a strategic way to address this. And so that has led to concerted efforts to identify grant and corporate dollars to address it from a housing perspective. And so these are models that are being tested out. Some approaches are done more in concert with community, and others are kind of done just within that coalition. But what that has led to in our city has been one tiny home community has been built, and a second is in discussion of being built in another part of the city. And there's different thoughts and feelings about these productions, or these projects, but the idea is that you're not only going to give them this temporary spacing, but you're going to then identify additional supportive resources that are necessary for them to, whether it's mental health resources, obviously the basic living like food and clothing, and access to potential job opportunities and cleanup resources, and all of the of those kinds of supportive tools. But I think the cautionary tale in this, again, is working with the community and identifying where you would put something like this. Obviously, you're working with city-owned properties and things like that, where you can, or city-owned land, or state land that allows a lot more negotiations to occur. But when you move these things into other neighborhoods, single family neighborhoods, or neighborhoods with small children, or a deaf community, these are things, other layered factors that certainly will contribute or detract from quality of life. So I think it's a very necessary conversation. It's one of those things that I think one of my colleagues mentioned earlier. You could have things happening. You could be in the same city and have very different dynamics in play as to what the height and challenge is. And so it requires the narrative to start, from a grassroots level of, how understand that the dynamic of the problem. And you mentioned violent-based homelessness, so clearly that's the mental health issue would be raised even higher in that regard. And then you have to identify the boots on the ground that are going to be able to do the long-term planning, resource identification, and then implementation. And so not to give away too much safe growth, but I really think it's important for that process to be not only transparent, but realistic in understanding what it takes to actually sustainably address these issues. But certainly is a much needed area of growth.
Thank you so much for that. I know Renee quick drawed in the middle of that. So
Yeah, I know,
Renee,
because
please respond.
then Pamela, you did mention the whole mental health, because I think what I see in our city, the combination, the violence I see with homeless is a mental health concern. And I think, again, even sometimes I even say, like, housing doesn't even solve this. It's basically providing mental health services, and then the combination of drugs. I mean, most of the violence we experience here from homeless is a combination of mental health issues with extremely, now legal drugs in our city here, the consumption, which again, it makes it so hard for the police to even respond, law enforcement, because some of the drugs, even heroin, has been legalized. So it's really hard to control this, because I think most of these people need mental health more than they even need housing. I mean, or hopefully a combination of, but only providing housing seems to be less effective even here, because then you still have the issues of mental health and drug use, which then creates the violence, which again then scares families away, because we used to have downtown farmers market, and families used to go there, but I heard more and more that little kids finding needles on the pavement, and so the parents, or a dog got a needle stuck in their snoot there. So people are not going anymore because it's too dangerous from a health standpoint as well, as part of that. But I think that's the biggest crisis, it's a mental health crisis, actually.
Thank you, Greg.
Yeah, I raised my hand because, I mean, this is both what Pamela is saying, what Renee's saying. A lot of it's driven by data, and we don't have great data on homelessness issues. If that's the one element of blight you're talking about, and there are many others as well. Toxic street drugs is a huge part of the story. But I mean, I'm looking for data on not the food deserts, but I'm looking for the data on the food oases, the kinds of food facilities that folks would need that isn't just, fast foods, things like that. What are the perceptions of the homeless people themselves? We say mental health is a big issue, what it is, but what's the percentage? What's the percentage of mental health issues with homeless in one city versus another? They're not the same. We've been doing homeless projects unsuccessful and successfully in our group for over 5 years now. And we've discovered that there are some homelessness response, like navigator programs. If you don't know a navigator program, it's social workers going out to the homeless and trying to navigate them into facilities. That's one. Now there's a small home. And Portland has lots of examples of small home villages like Dignity Village. That's another one. And then there's the Homes First, which in the ICA, there's an ICA white paper on Homes First. If you finish this webinar, check out the ICA section, because it has a whole white paper just talking about the Homes First strategy. But any of those strategies require good data. And we just don't have great data on this. We know that mental health is a big factor, which is third generation CPTED. That would come into play. We know that drugs is another issue. That's part of it. We know that mental health is an issue. But how do the proportions vary city by city? I'd love to hear Julie Wartel's perspective on this as the data person.
So real quick, I know Randy had his hand up. Do you want to answer before Julie, or do you want to let her have this one?
Let Julie go ahead, and then I want to jump in about sort of the next step of the problem of the challenges of homelessness and mental health. So Julie, please kick in.
Yeah, thank you. And Greg, good segue, because that's what I was going to talk about before you all jumped in ahead of me. So data, huge problem. And one of the efforts in San Diego. So working currently on two big efforts, one in San Diego and one in Boulder, Colorado. But San Diego, this started about 2.5 years ago. And this is through my position at UC San Diego in the Department of Urban Studies and Planning, that I get a text from a faculty member, like, we've been meeting all of the different faculty relating to homelessness throughout San Diego County from like 4 or 5 different colleges and universities, and no one has a map of where all of the homeless encampments are. Can you make a map? So I download the data from the city of San Diego, has a 311 system, homeless encampments, send back the map. You know, where are the bus stations? Where are the parks? Where are the schools? And so out of that, we applied for and got a small grant to start the homelessness hub at UC San Diego. And we're really a data repository, and we have a lot of great students and faculty doing projects. We still haven't quite gotten into that. How can we get policymakers on board? And so we strongly believe that it's the community and policymakers using that data and research to drive that decision-making. But it depends on what city you're in as to what the policymakers truly want to use and do. Switching on a more positive note to Boulder, Colorado, not urban and not necessarily urban blight, but more like a livability issue in a beautiful mountain town in Colorado. And that idea was generated from the police chief a couple of years ago, saying, this is out of control. They're like a leader in housing homeless, but their encampments just keep getting worse. More homeless keep coming in. So we applied for and got a grant that we're partway through on identifying specifically the harms that encampments are causing. So we all know, all the panelists, all the audience here, that homelessness is a super complex issue, and no one answer, as we've heard, is going to solve homelessness. So we attack it instead from that very specific. If we can reduce the amount of harms that these homeless encampments, persistent homeless encampments are causing, then maybe we can start to have that effect. The beauty of this project is it's that every department in the city and some in the county, plus NGOs, are contributing data and information and input about how do we identify these harms? How do we look at them all together? So the park rangers have their issues and saying environmental harms, and public works have their issues saying, well, we pick up needles at encampments, and police say we have violence. And so we're looking at that all together. I wish I had an answer and telling you that exactly what we're doing works, but we're really just in the analysis stage. And then we're going to create custom strategies around each of these encampments. So sorry to go on a little long. Happy to talk to anyone further or provide any information about either of these efforts that I'm working on currently.
Thank you, Julie. Before I give it back to Randy, I want to let everybody else know we have quite a lot of work going on in the chat. We also have the question and answer thing. So if we don't get to your question, we're going to wrap them up and connect you to whoever you'd like to address it. I know Julie's got a couple in the queue already. So Randy?
I'd like to sort of address the issue that was brought up about homelessness, but then take it sort of a little different fork in the road, which is what does it look like when a downtown core is in its death rattle? And I had an opportunity about a year or so ago to go to San Jose, California. One of my CPTED students ran a security guard service out there. And he said, Randy, please come out and take a look and see if you can come up with recommendations. I'm just struggling. My company is hired to go out and try and protect these businesses, and they're just leaving in droves. Literally today, there was a memo from ASIS International that they're putting on a workshop about retail crime and the fact that the stores are just shuttering up and abandoning. And so it's these challenges of abandonment of the downtowns that's really sort of the fuel for the fire that enables the homeless encampments and the attractive magnets for all the people that we don't really want there, that are not the legitimate users, and the families and the people who have money to buy clothes and go to a show and buy dinner or whatever. And what I found in San Jose was this was a very attractive town. They had great infrastructure. They had a wonderful transit system downtown, and it was, lush landscaping, and the homeless encampments were just everywhere. People weren't using the trains. There was the storefronts were all boarded up. There was nothing about going to this beautiful city that was attractive, that would have entice people to come there and spend money, because it's really about the business of business, and we forget that. You know, right now, in my opinion, as a criminologist, the United States is a country of mentally ill people, and every day when you pick up the newspaper and someone decides to do some problem solving with an AR-15 or, you know, whatever, the latest massacre du jour, oh, he had mental health issues. Really? I have mental health issues all the time. I don't go out and buy a gun and shoot up people. I think about it, but I don't do it. So, you know, how do we get past this sense of abandonment and the fact that the storefronts are being boarded up, and that there's this blight, the flight of the retail stores, because people aren't going there to buy things at the malls anymore, going to the shops. They're just going on Amazon or online and buy stuff faster, cheaper, tax-free, often free shipping. It's like, I never have to leave the house. We've all become that country of people that are just hiding within the confines of our residential unit. And that is a death knell for downtowns, where you're trying to attract people. Come, spend your money. Come to go see a show, go buy dinner, go out to a nightclub, have a cocktail, go to a cigar bar, whatever, you know, walk your dog in the park. How do we have that happen when the storefronts are boarded up and they're graffiti and tagging everywhere? And it's like the radiation movies of the 70s with Charleston Heston, and all you do is see the red eyes of the people of the street vampires in the buildings, because people have been mutated from the radiation. People are afraid to go. So I think that part of what has to be addressed is, how do we shift the sense of abandonment and the boarding up of stores, and this visual blight that is not enticing for people to come. In Seattle and Portland and in other cities like San Jose. I mean, I just had an officer talk to me about a city here in South Florida, that they're being attacked by the homeless populations that are coming here, and there's a sense of entitlement. There isn't enough money in the world to spend your way out of that. The cities have in California have well documented that, you know, that just, from what I've read, that just can't happen. So I'd like to address, you know, some ideas from the panel about how do we stop this, you know, the boarding up of storefronts and the vacancies, and attracting businesses to come there. With one final thought, way back in the day, like the 90s, Lincoln Road, which is one of our pedestrian malls, sort of like the 17th Street Mall in Denver, and in Boulder has that big, that open street mall that's so nice, or at least it used to be nice. And the stores, the big box stores all left. And what they did is they filled those storefronts up with college kids and artists, and then they made it a very hip area to go to for all the artists and young people. And then it became so successful in that now the stores came back, and now it's, you know, now it's outpriced itself, and now it's so expensive that all the artists and stuff, it all had to go leave again. So there's this weird cycle of ebbing and flowing.
All right, so I'm going to jump on that one a little bit, because it's an intriguing part we have here. When somebody's mentioned in the chat about the criminality of it and violent criminals, things like that. The reality in most of our cities, the homelessness part is not, doesn't quite fit into the criteria of that. But I know in Garland, and Greg and I've talked about this before, all these sort of CPTED principles of cohesion, community, transparency actually benefits the folks in our homeless community as well. When we've looked at areas where folks have set up camp, they tend to be places that have sustainable water, they have sustainable food, just like anybody else would in any other place. So that is one of the challenges of trying to figure out what space is designed for and what space is to be used for. And that sort of evolution, like Randy said, the redevelopment of downtowns, converting them to being a downtown square with a soda pop stand and a bank and a barbershop and a doctor's office and all those things, to being destination areas. And as you make things destination areas, they're destinations for all people. And trying to find what is the balance of that destination, what is the community going to allow. And I think sometimes it's troubling when we don't engage all of the community in that conversation of who is it that we want to have involved in it, who do we not, and what sort of parameters do we have about the use of it. So I think that's going to be one of the interesting things is, as you redesign it, I know even on some of my CPTED surveys, I found people that have put a refrigerator in front of a door, which effectively turns the door into a wall. And it's sort of this reusing of it, and it's this mispurposing of materials. The bad thing is the redevelopment becomes really expensive. But as most of our cities start getting built out, we have no other choice than to redesign them. And for me, they have to evolve. They have to change in some manner. The last project I did in school was on the value per square foot of property in any city in North America, ironically, was about data centers, because they don't require any resources. It's a lot of power, and it fuels all of our digital footprints, our phones, our data, all of our storage, things like that. And you can run a plant of about 60,000 square feet with 4 people, as long as the power doesn't go out. And they're very valuable, but they don't provide a lot of resources. They provide no community, they provide no services, nor do they bleed into the community around it. So within that one, Allison, I'm calling your number. I'm bringing you in. What's your thoughts as the criminologist on that sort of thing? Is like, what role do we have in that to kind of find our way forward?
In what aspect of finding our way forward, Patrick? Can you expand on that?
Yeah, kind of talking about Randy's things, because you have different things sort of rolling in together. The role of, the criminologist, the CPTED, have a perspective on how to deal with these economic issues, a lot of social issues. Can we even use these tools to find our way through, or is it almost an intractable problem of the evolution of societies?
So from a theoretical perspective, I mean, we have the macro level approach, looking at a broader perspective, features of the environment, and, poverty, residential turnover, shaping the environment. And then we have the micro level approach, looking at what is happening at a smaller level scale, right? The exact opportunity, what is going on within the actual spot at one moment. So we can look at the whole environment, or we can look at one spot within the whole environment. Well, from that whole approach, I think we need to look at everything. So we need to look at the entire picture. So we need to look at the opportunity within the broader environment to solve all the problems. Can we solve all the problems? No, but we need to tackle the small things as well as the broader picture. When it comes to virtualization and everybody just, hunkering and taking their bunkers and going inside, well, that's going to be a problem, because we want to bring community outside. We are all working from home. I work from home. Greg has actually brought me out to work in the field. So it's a different life nowadays. So working from home, all the students want to take online classes. We have to do something to address the small micro level with the bigger picture. So I think things are going to be changing a lot. Our criminological theories are even going to be changing. This whole environmental criminology is going to be completely revamped. It's not going to be so much, the environment is going to be completely different. So environmental criminology is not going to be what we know it today. So those are my thoughts. Greg, I see your hand raised, so you can jump in on this one.
Greg, it's all yours.
You're on mute, Greg.
Yeah, I'll let Mia go. She's got a perspective from Palm Springs, which probably informs this, and then I'll follow Mia. So Mia, over to you.
Hi, I'm sorry. I did want to just revisit something really quickly. I think that I noticed there's just a loss of empathy towards homelessness in general. And I've asked so many children, like, would you like to grow up to be homeless, or what would you like to do when you grow up? No one ever said that they wanted to be a drug addict or homeless. And it's such just lack of empathy. And I've, had conversations with people at the Palm Springs Police Department, West Hollywood Police Department, and it's kind of the attitude, even the individuals who are assigned to assist the homeless, that they want to be there. And I think as long as public perception has that negative viewpoint, and drug addicts or homelessness, I don't think it is going to change, unfortunately. So I think it kind of goes both ways and kind of just revamping public perception about where people want to be and, you know, where they want to go and caring. And also with regards to downtown and shopping. And I did a lot of research on this because I wondered, was it just a consumer issue where people are getting good deals on Amazon or at Walmart? And in the 60s, there was a famous song by Petula Clark, and it hit the top 100 in 1964, and it was about downtown. And the most interesting part about that was there's not really too much about shopping or anything. It's about meeting someone that's kind, meeting someone like you, and let all your cares go when you go downtown, and you know your troubles will be gone because you're going to feel loved and be loved. And I thought that was really interesting because if you look back at that particular time or those couple of years, it was a lot about just inclusive and going downtown to be seen and to connect and meet people, and not necessarily shopping. And people were absolutely horrified if they saw someone on the street, you know, and unfortunately, I think we're all guilty of that because it happened in such kind of small increments. And I used to live in San Francisco. I saw someone in an alley one time, and we almost never saw homelessness there, and it horrified me. And I felt that I had to do something. Over the years, we just saw more and more of it. And I started to feel that attitude too, that they just wanted to be there, until I started digging deeper into it. So that's my thoughts about the homeless issue and our attitudes as well, and having empathy for them.
Can I build on that, Mr. Moderator?
Please.
Okay. So Mia, yes, funny you said that song. I was thinking of the lyrics. I looked it up the other day, and the first lyrics of that song, from the 60s says, "When you're alone and life is making you lonely, you can always go downtown." I mean, that was the image, right? The downtown was a place that was a community. It was a neighborhood. It was a place you could go for fun things.
Exactly.
You know, if it's, and I put a lot of the blame on this, not on the homelessness, which is a ridiculous thing to do, because that's a symptom of a bigger issue. You know, affordable housing, the economy, and things like that. I put the blame on people who are managing cities, people who are running cities, people who are planning cities, people who are governing the leaders, because every time they fail to address affordability of housing, they cause part of the problem. Every time they say, let the cops handle it. I can tell you right now, the police in Palm Springs are actually doing stuff because you were part of a training that we did to try to start this movement forward. It's the first police force there to do safe growth in homelessness. So they're trying to do their bit, but it's not actually their job. It's not the police job to do this. This is a city management, city governance sort of strategy. And so, you know, the question I have is, every time a city says, oh, let's put in a franchise, let's put in a multinational corporation, let's put in a telecoms a company, the very kinds of businesses that don't reinforce the sense of community and take away from the mom and pop places and price the mom and pop places out of business. They are in effect creating the revival of blight in downtowns. I'll leave it there. Let the panel deal with that.
Well, I think that's a great point. The mom and pop business as part of the design, the new approaches that cities especially are taking is really at the center of like that economic redevelopment or the reigniting of a downtown. And so there's like this balance that you have to try when you're looking at, for example, the film industry as one of the potential saviors in quote of cities too, because that's multi-million-dollar investment and 3 and 6 studio stages. That's not only the jobs for on-site jobs, but the boost to the local economy, the restaurants that get built, all of the local vendors that could then become potential vendors of the studios themselves. And so their success, that obviously Atlanta has been very successful. Lionsgate is one entity that's also expanding to Newark, New Jersey. They're going to invest $125 million multi-stage studio here in Newark at the site of a former housing project, the Seth Boyden project. And it's in an area where there's not a lot of economic activity. There's not a lot of mom and pop shops. The site itself has been vacant since 2015. And even before that, it needed to be vacant because of all the things that were going on there and for many years. And we're talking decades, something built in I believe in the 80s. And so I think there's definitely a balance that's necessary to make sure that it just doesn't become this bubbled club of economic activity within the hub itself, but that it expands throughout the entire city. And so that from a regulatory perspective is something that obviously is on the responsibility of the city, but how do you create that proper pressure on the city? That's where the community involvement comes in. That's where the alignment of values should be known in advance by the city, and then holding the feet to the fire once those initial plans start coming out. And so you really have to practice that muscle as a resident of being able to challenge zoning board meetings and planning board meetings and so on, but it's not insurmountable. Sure.
All right, I've got, go ahead.
Sorry. With what Pamela is talking about, this balance, I think it's really important to address the needs of the next generation. So the balance of everything, and no offense to age anybody here, but the 1960s song, let's talk about the next generation song and what's coming out on Bruno Mars and Taylor Swift songs about virtual love and long distance relationships. I mean, this is the way things are going. So we need to talk about this virtualization. That's why we're here, right? We're talking about virtualization of life. And yes, there is a problem of urban blight, but this virtualization of life is not going away. So this balance of how we're going to have this virtualization of life. And I see it in my students all the time. They want to have a life behind their screens. They want to have a life with their friends that are behind their screens, and their life in their community is something completely different than what we lived. And I mean, my children, they want to play video games with their friends inside our house. Yeah, it's the way that we're parenting, going out, we watch them ride their bikes. They're not going down to the local creek and playing by themselves like we did. We're constantly parenting them. We go to the park with them and we watch them swing. It's like, that's what we do. So we're doing it to ourselves. This is the way life is nowadays. So Pamela, with the whole balance and community engagement, we need to shift our focus. And the way CPTED comes into this is something completely different. I don't know what that answer is exactly, but criminological theory needs to change. And I think we're just like going in this whole separate path, and something just needs to move forward in some other direction. So
how do you propose that thing? Oh, I'm sorry. How do you propose things move forward virtually? Do you have any ideas about or suggestions about how that might occur if we're focused on that?
So based on my students, they want to have their life virtually, but they want to focus on green spaces. They focus a lot on the environment. They focus a lot on sustainable businesses, things that they want, products that help the environment. So they don't like businesses that hurt the environment. And that's what I know.
I know it doesn't work. I know, which is the ostrich effect, putting your head in the sand.
Right.
Yeah.
And I know there's people who use the old Republican Democrat trope. They'll say, oh, the Democrat cities are the ones that have problems. Oh, the Republican cities, what you've got to do.
Yeah.
But this is pure nonsense. It's pure nonsense. If you think of the 60s and 70s, after that, there were many successful cities that were Democratic cities and many unsuccessful cities that were Republican cities. That's got nothing to do with it. And
the young people also don't care politically either.
Absolutely.
Right. Exactly. That's not where the solution should lie in that kind of an ostrich.
What I've found as an organizer is that you ignite the spark of participation in problems, but you get the long-term participation when you focus on solutions. So as you start to listen to people and hear what they want, and again, CPTED, third generation CPTED focus on cohesion, focus on the things that people want, right? Allows you to really get them in a space of being contributors to your process, to your conversation, to be participants in your feedback loop on the things that you're putting in front of them. But if we're only focused on, not only the problem, but the blame game of the problem, right? Like we can visually see the problems and we all have our speculations and tons of data as to why, problems become what they are. But that focusing on that is not what's going to keep people at the table. And you do need residents at the table for in city run processes, like 2 to 3 years the minimum for them to see the at least one or two of the community set goals come to fruition. So how do you get people mentally in the space to give of themselves and their time and their interests and their challenges? That's blood, sweat, tears, right? Into these movements. You do that by focusing on solutions, not the problem.
And then it seems like young people have a desire to actually show up together, right? Because they do come together when there's a cause, and that's what I think. It's so important to bring the cities back, because for our sustainability movements, we need people to live together. We need the mass transit. We need actually concentration of people, and that's what's so sad at the moment. They all have left. They're all living outside. But I mean, I think there's a desire deep down that some of the young people understanding there's something missing if they only live behind their screens, and again, get them together really with a cause that they can rally behind, and then because they did show up, and again, sometimes not the positive ways, but they did show up, and they have a desire to feel part of a group, and actually be next to other people. And again, when we think again, the CPTED principles are based on all that. When Jane Jacobs write about these things, they're just basic human instincts. We want to see sometimes other people, want to actually see somebody face to face. And we can only do this virtual thing. I mean, that's my hope. I don't know. Maybe I hope it's just a wave currently, because after the pandemic and all this, hopefully we're getting back into the enjoyment. I see it with younger, people in our office as well, that they do like now gather together, have happy hours again. But because some of them never had that even. They entered the workforce, which was like sitting behind the screen, So I think we are hopefully moving towards, because we need that to save our cities. We need people to love to get together. And what's better than if you live in a high-rise downtown? I mean, you can work from home and do all this, but you go down and then you use restaurants and local, or the park, use the park for your social in-person connections, which are hopefully again coming back, because otherwise CPTED, I don't know, digital virtual CPTED, I don't know how that will work, because it doesn't really we need the physical environment for that, so I think, and then one thought, how we talked about the cycle, and it was interesting because even Jane Jacobs said you could have a really successful neighborhood and it can become too successful, then it's all pricing others out, happens, and then they could actually blight at the top of the success, because then after it's maybe people have left and rents go down again, then again, like we said, talking about Paul, the artists move in and make it vibrant and interesting again. But there is a natural cycle about how successful you want to have a neighborhood to be, but it's really hard to cap that, because maybe it just has to go through that, But anyway, so just two thoughts.
So I'm going to take this one back before I give it to Randy for my big question. But
yeah,
one thing to note, we have 74 people in a shared collaborative platform right now, engaging from all over the world, and very few people here seem to be in the same room. And so it does give me hope of both interest, enthusiasm, and the sense of community. Even as we wrestle through these issues, I'm watching the chat and watching people, roll their sleeves up and try to, provide great information, great statistics, great background and detail on that. But I do have a question for Dr. Randy Atlas. My question is, what is the challenge and opportunity for CPTED USA's ICA chapter in the United States in this moment, with all the past history of CPTED we've had here in our great country and our multicultural structure that we have today? So what are the challenges and opportunities, Randy?
I'm learning. I think the challenges are coming up with an agenda that there's consensus on. And I find that it's just very difficult to get agreement from more than your significant other and yourself of where you're going for dinner. It becomes very difficult to make a decision. And I'm experiencing here that the school boards can't come up with consensus. They can't come up with policy consensus. They can't, the government entities can't come up consensus about where they want to expand, the next area for land for housing. They can't have consensus on how high they want to build the buildings. They can't come up with consensus about funding the parks or redoing the sidewalks or the critical infrastructure. So the civility of the country has changed of how we engage in dialogue, in my opinion. And so I think the opportunity where back in the day when I was doing a lot of workshops and teaching CPTED and doing design charrettes, which is sort of an architectural term for the architects and planners and the local community activists to sort of sit around and discuss, well, and we'd write it on paper, what would you like and what can we do and who does that, and then have those people there. And it was this collaborative interactive process that Greg was the one responsible for teaching me how to move into a space of collaboration rather than just isolation, because I'm just a bull in a china shop. I come from the school of thought, when in doubt, use a bigger hammer and or a bigger truck or a bigger bulldozer. That's my personal perspective, because I have been ineffective in being able to get the grassrooting of people to come in consensus to say, let's go out and pick up all the beer cans on the ocean and the beach, or let's pick up the tires that have been dumped in the ocean, or let's fix the Everglades, or let's whatever. Those are becoming rarer and rarer events where there's this team effort and process to go out and make a positive difference in your community. And I'll segue to Greg here in just a second. The opportunities for CPTED in the United States and our USA chapter is that we are presenting the opportunity for people to feel that they're not alone. And I think that the calls and the letters I'm getting from people in my class and from wherever, they're wanting, well, what have other places done? What have you done? Where can we do? What is our choices? And so if we're able to disseminate possibilities, then they become opportunities. Greg, would you like to segue on that?
Yeah, I'm just thinking of my friend Gary Menger, who runs a company in California. It's a geographic information company called Applied Geographics, and they don't look at crime. Well, they do, but they look at things like not just affordable housing, but what kinds of restaurants do you have in your neighborhood? Now, how far is it to walk to amenities, things like that? And I think they're on the right track. My biggest complaint with the criminology world, environmental criminology, and the group who try to study geography is that they tend to ask questions that are broad. Their questions are kind of like with the theory that somehow the findings of these research are going to trickle down to the practitioners where it's going to actually make a difference. Well, trickle down theory, like trickle down economics, never worked. And so I think in the ICA, what we have to do, particularly the USA ICA, is we have to rediscover the neighborhood, which is what the roots of CPTED originally were back in the 60s. We have to go back to the neighborhood. That's where the crime happens. It happens at the neighborhood level. And when you have problems with homelessness, when you have problems with street drugs, it's the neighbors who are directly affected most, and the victims of it, the homeless people themselves. The neighborhood capacity building, neighborhood asset building, that's where we need to start to readdress CPTED. I think CPTED has been applied in a generic way, help that industrial plaza there, stop burglaries and so forth. And when you read a lot of the criminology research, it's on burglary. People are not talking about burglary in the real places where crime is happening in the neighborhoods. They're not. They're talking about the things we're talking about here today. So I think what we need is a research agenda and a practitioner agenda focused on reestablishing American neighborhoods. That's where I think the future is. That's it.
I agree. I'm sorry. I just wanted to interject. Most of the young people I've talked to are actually people of all ages. It's not that they necessarily want a virtual life, it's become the culture and the norm, and they actually don't know how to connect in person or where to go to meet people, or they feel like an outsider as opposed to a collective group. And I think that does start on a neighborhood level, and just with it, really anything, because without connection, I don't believe anything will happen. And starting local neighborhoods, great idea.
All right. So we have about 10 minutes to go. We have a couple things I want to wrap up, but I would like if everybody give me, 30 to 45 seconds, kind of some final thoughts, takeaways, what you want folks to kind of walk away with their best ideas or inspirations. We'll do it that way. Randy, would you mind going first?
I would like to suggest for the attendees consideration that mental health starts at home, that caring starts at home, discipline starts at home, and that it's my experience that the family unit has become more fractured and more disconnected. I'm sure everyone on the panel and the people listening here will relate to this next sarcasm and cynicism remark from me, which of course I'm infamously known for, which is the fact that just the other night, Trish and I were out for dinner somewhere. We watched this family, a young family, probably they were in their 30s, the parents, and they had a litter of children, like 2 or 3 of them. And the parents and the children were all in their face on their phones. No one was talking. No one was asking, how was your day? No one was having any interactives. So I forgot who brought up on the panel here about how the skill sets for young people are severely, I need a polite word here, impaired. My experience as a professor at Fort Atlanta University for 15 years, the college 20-somethings, they didn't know how to write. They didn't know how to read. They had literally no social skills. They couldn't act, they didn't know how to, God bless, one of the kids would text the girl next to him, hi, what are you doing? I mean, there was just literally no ability of, I said, how are you going to pick up somebody? Aren't you going to go out? Are you going to go out to a bar? I mean, what are you going to do? Just sit there and have your face buried in the fire? And when you go out to nightclubs, in fact, in Fort Lauderdale, which is, Party Central USA, most of the kids are sitting around at night in the bars looking at their phones of who's watching them, watch them. What? So in my opinion, we've lost focus about communication skills, about interaction skills, about collaboration skills. And with that comes a sense of purpose, a sense of direction, a sense of meaning, and a sense of value. And ultimately, all those coming together into a sense of community. In my humble opinion.
Thank you, sir. Renee, final thoughts.
Yeah, I think also this was a super interesting conversation, and I like the idea of using CPTED, and I mean all generations, the first, second, and third generation, to bring people together again, because I think we have to bring people together again to live in a sustainable future. We have to embrace downtown and cities again and living close by, and I think that could be like the motto for our chapter here. I think to really using CPTED. And again, using examples, using sharing examples, sharing stories about how others can apply CPTED in their communities across the US and the world, maybe.
Thank you, sir. Pamela?
I think my takeaway that I hope everyone walks away with is really remembering the importance and the power of community networks. Really reaching into the fabric of a community and building coalition around issues, and making sure that not only residents, people who are live there, from there, have invested their time and their money to be a part of a community, but also young people. As we see, we need to clean up a little bit our conversation today. The young people certainly can play a role being at the table in shedding light on things, but also suggesting, making recommendations, because as Dr. Martin mentioned, their children and their grandchildren are going to be the ones living the reality of the decisions that we're making today. So I think that's really important for us to keep close to that.
Thank you, ma'am. Julie.
Yeah, and building off of Pamela, I think, it's great. We have such a variety of people participating today, because that's what it's going to take, is the community, working with governmental agencies, working with the non-governmental agencies, and expertise from a variety of sectors. And no one agency or one expertise is going to solve or even improve our problems until we all work together on it.
Thank you, ma'am. Mia, final thoughts.
Reinforcing what Dr. Atlas was talking about, just, it does begin in the home. There's been so many studies done just with babies who didn't receive affection or connection, or, many of them died or didn't, do well in life later on. And it's crucial to the human to connect and, not just have a virtual life, but also have that connection and belonging. And I think a lot of us don't know how to anymore. And I think it's about restoring that and getting people to have empathy for each other and caring without being able to understand how someone else might be confronted with certain issues or put ourselves in their shoes. We'll never really understand the problem as a whole.
Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Martin.
Thank you. So I think just moving forward, building the community, looking at our needs and addressing the blight issues with CPTED practices and regaining that territoriality. So.
Greg Seville, final thoughts.
Well, there's no going back to the 60s. One of the commenters are saying it sounds like you're all talking about going back. No, we're not going back to the 60s. Besides which, the solutions weren't that good anyway. So we need a new kind of going forward. I think that's real. But I do think that if cyber or no cyber, people today are thirsty for face-to-face. They are, and I know they like their cameras, but when we talk to people and they want places, they want to get together. They do. They're thirsty for that. So I think we need to go back to the neighborhood where we started in CPTED. We need to rethink how that happens, how we can retool research. That would be one. And then going back to my professor days when I was teaching, I would like to leave our audience with some homework, and that is, there is an International CPTED Association. There's a conference this year in Brazil. If you're able to do that, that'd be a great conference. Our chapter is considering a conference in Palm Springs in the spring of next year. We'd love to see you at that conference. Watch our website and Facebook. And then finally, there's data. But not great data. Julie needs to get on that and fix it for us because we need more data. There's a homeless paper already available on the ICA website. Please check that out. We're at the early stages of tackling these blight issues. So I think we need to go back to the neighborhood. So I'll leave it there.
I agree. And nobody wants to go back to the 60s. That's not what I'm suggesting. I'm just suggesting that we need restoration of the ideologies of connection and, needing that like human exchange in personal contact.
So I'm going to share my screen just to remind everybody that CPTED membership is available to everybody here. That is your membership tag there, but CPTED is the one that should stay on your quick memories, and remember that one as long as you possibly can to join membership. But it also, as Greg mentioned, membership also includes a discount to the conference. So we have quite a few available. I'm sharing that. Also includes discounts to the conference, and also there's a lot of links in the chat, both to join the ICA, but also for those that would complete our survey and let us know how they enjoyed the webcast today. So I thank everybody for your participation. We'll give a virtual hand to all of our participants for joining us. The panelists did a great job. We have a lot of people chiming in. I apologize to those that I couldn't reach their questions. I'm going to drop my email into the chat as well. If you'd like to follow up with a question I didn't get to, I can definitely coordinate it to who it needs to get to. But thank you guys so very much. Thank you to all of our panelists. Everyone did a great job.
Thank you.
Take care, all.
Thank
Bye.
you. Yeah. Great conversation.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.